Plato. Have you ever had the feeling that things are not quite what they seem? The ancient thinker Plato made it part of his philosophy not to trust your eyes. In this story, you'll learn about his famous allegory of the cave and find out why one of antiquity's greatest thinkers suspected something much greater lies beyond the visible world. Thank you for watching my video. Leave a like and a subscription if you like. I would be very happy about that, and now have fun with the video. A world of shadows. Imagine you're sitting tied up in a cave with some other prisoners. Your face is turned to the wall. You can only see this wall and the shadows that move on it. Behind you, people are walking around in front of a fire and holding up all kinds of objects that cast their shadows on the wall. You can't see the things themselves, only their shadows. The shadows on the wall are your only reality. You're caught up in a kind of theatrical illusion. Suddenly, though, your shackles are loosened. You turn around and at first are blinded by the fire. Gradually, however, you start to make out the shadow players and their props. And there's more. You see a long corridor that leads to the mouth of the cave. You walk along it and find the way out. Dazzled by the sun, you go through a painful moment of understanding. Literally, an enlightenment. For with the sunlight comes the knowledge that not only are the shadows on the wall of the cave a false version of reality, but the cave itself is only a small part of a much larger world. You go back into the cave and tell the others about your discoveries, about how everything they can see on the wall is just a shadow of reality. They don't believe a word you say. They just laugh and tell you you're crazy. They carry on staring at the wall. It's their whole world after all. They even threaten you. They'll kill anyone who tries to free them too, and lead them out of the cave. Philosophy shines a light. Often nothing is what it seems. The Greek philosopher Plato knew this 2,500 years ago. That is, long before Instagram and other social media made illusory versions of reality into a business model. In Plato's allegory of the cave, illusion becomes reality. It shows that independent thinking is not only arduous, but also often risky. It's risky for the curious prisoner in the cave because he recognizes the real world beyond the shadows, but is met with laughter and threats when he shares what he knows. It's risky also in the real world. Plato's friend and teacher Socrates experienced this. He was sentenced to death for questioning the common opinions and certainties of his time, especially those held by the powerful. As a student of Socrates, Plato was greatly influenced by his master and put him into his own work. He repeatedly had Socrates enter into dialogue with others and his writings and ask them questions, practicing his famous Socratic method. Socrates would pick apart every opposing argument so that in the end the people he was conversing with had to admit their ignorance. In Plato's allegory of the cave, too, the prisoners basically know nothing, and the little bit they think they know turns out to be a perfect illusion. Plato believed the truth was to be known by looking beyond our limited experience of the world to the ideal form of all things. And just as the prisoner freed from the cave turns to the sun, and all at once sees the real world beyond everything he had previously known, so the seeker of truth must first free himself from the visible world. Only then can we recognize the real nature of things. This process of discovering the truth in Plato was the job of the philosophers. Their role was to look beyond the surface, or to use the cave story again, it was their job to get rid of their shackles and step out of the cave into the light. As soon as they were able to do so, however, it was their responsibility to return to the cave and enlighten the ignorant. For Plato, the truth was not to be found in visible things, but in the idea of those things. This was the core of his philosophy. Plato's two worlds. According to Plato, man could not trust the visible world because it always represented reality incompletely. Plato distinguished between what man perceives in the visible world and an absolute truth beyond it. This truth lay in the world of ideas. So for Plato, there were basically two worlds. The world of the senses comprises everything that we perceive directly. That is, everything that we see, hear, and feel. But this world of the senses is only an image of a world beyond it, the world of ideas. The world of ideas cannot be perceived with the senses. it becomes visible only through the imagination. For example, when we draw a circle, the drawing is based on the idea of a perfect circle. Nonetheless, the circles which we then actually draw don't possess that perfection. Only as an idea is the circle really perfect. However, this also means that real knowledge for Plato existed only in the world of ideas. The world of the senses was simply too unreliable for him because it depended too much on the perception of the individual. In the world of the senses, there could be no real knowledge for Plato, only incomplete knowledge at best, clouded by subjective sense perception, or in a word, opinions. Love and the perfect state. Most all of the big questions that philosophers of later centuries struggled with already appear in Plato's work. So it's hardly surprising that Plato also founded an institution of learning, his Academia school of philosophy. It's where the modern term academy comes from. Following the example of his teacher Socrates, Plato also wanted to spend a lifetime learning and teaching. He wanted to get to the bottom and essence of things. In everything he wrote and did, he wanted to look beyond the world of the senses. This principle was the basis of all his writings, whether he was dealing with political theory or with questions of love. Yes, even with love, he wanted to look beyond the surface, beyond the physical. Here too, as in his political writing, he was searching for the ideal state. The highest form of love, according to Plato, was based, as in the famous allegory of the cave, on an absolute truth far above all sensual experience. This kind of affection came to be known as Platonic love. In this respect too, according to Plato, nothing the realm of the senses brings us is complete and perfect. Political systems too, for Plato, were nothing other than imperfect images of an ideal society. The ideal state should be one thing above all, Plato thought. It should be just. He described this in the Republic, one of his most famous works, as the fruit of cooperation among different groups to which he assigned the essential tasks in this just state. According to Plato, it was the philosopher's job to see beyond the imperfect world of the senses and to distinguish truth from illusion, so only they, in his opinion, could ensure true justice. In Plato's perfect state, therefore, philosophers ruled. This rule by philosopher kings has brought Plato a lot of criticism. After all, who gets to distinguish between a wise ruler and one who merely considers himself wise? This was not democratic, and so Plato's philosophy was not only admired in some regards, but also questioned in others. In fact, his best and most famous student was to become his greatest critic. His name was Aristotle. After this story, you now know 1. Plato was a student of the famous philosopher Socrates, and often put Socrates into his own works, showing him in dialogue with others. 2. Plato was the creator of the so-called theory of ideas. For him, true knowledge was not hidden in material things, but in the intellectual ideas beyond all things. 3. In Plato's famous allegory of the cave, he describes how a man is freed from the limitations of his mind and for the first time glimpses the true nature of things. 4. For Plato, physical affection represents only the lowest stage of human love. The highest stage for him is pure love, independent of the physical. This is also called Platonic love. 5. Plato believed that only philosophers could properly govern. This idea of rule by philosophers still attracts criticism today. Thank you for watching my video. See you next time. Goodbye.